That clip is from Adventure Time Season 1, Episode 10, called The Duke and Donny. That was a part with Donny. Now, Donny's a grass ogre. He's kind of a bully, but his attitude keeps these predators, wolves, away from the house people. Now, this is kind of silly, and it's absurd as humor, but I believe there's more to this clip and more to this episode as a whole. I'm not going to show the entire episode because I think this clip sort of summarizes a lot of the things that I find interesting, and so we're going to go on from here. The main problem in the episode is that Finn learns that a bully like Donny is like really annoying and should stop bullying people, but it's occasionally necessary to stop harsher violence from happening to allow the bully to be around. This is funny because in this episode it's like a fictional version with Obnoxygen, which doesn't exist, but I believe this is a larger pattern that happens in life as well. Now, what I want to focus on, starting with the wolves, is that it's an interesting complication in this episode, and that the main characteristic that's featured in their self-defined curiosity, they even say we are possessed by the spirit of inquiry, their aside in this manner might have the potential meaning beyond absurdist humor, and that their fondness for questioning is related to their non-traditional status as antagonists. They're antagonists because these creatures are at first glance, like they just seem like predators, right? Just wolves or whatever, but they actually possess agency, reason, and a thirst for things other than blood, like knowledge or wisdom. These writers are pretty interesting in that they make the point that these wolves can be more threatening because they can question the foundations of society or reality itself. This motivation to question makes the wolves more than annoying because with a certain amount of understanding what is true, one is more able to fight the things they disagree with. These conniving canines are worse than your average bad guy like Donny because they understand the things that they do. The wolves only chew on the house people in this clip, but it can be reasonably assumed, as I do, that this is akin to playing with their food. They're sadistic. These wolves, if given the chance, would devour every last one of these weaker species because they're much stronger and they can plan. Their motivation is more complicated than Donny's because they're better able to change motivations and meet more complex problems with their superior intellect and planning. Something else that I find very fascinating about this clip and the relation between the wolves and Donny is that Donny represents nearly everything that the wolves are not. First, Donny is alone where the wolves are unified. This signifies that the wolves are part of an organized and structured pack. This means that they are a more credible threat than Donny. Second, Donny is literally made of grass. He's a sort of grass ogre in this fictional depiction, but it's generally not as threatening as a pack of hungry wolves. If you thought of a grass creature and a pack of hungry wolves that can talk, I would be terrified of the hungry wolves that can talk, not the grass creature. This is why the wolves have fewer qualms with causing severe harm. As wolves, their intrinsic nature is to eat and be predators, kill things. They have different ideas in addition to this about what makes them. As wolves, they have different ideas intrinsic to their physiology about what morals would be to them, right? So if you're endowed with reason and you're a wolf, your ideas are going to be a bit different than if you're human, say. Because if it's necessary for you to hunt, kill, eat meat, then it's no longer a moral imposition. It's something that's like an imperative. It's just a given. Donny enjoys light hazing, but he doesn't really cross the line into torture, murder, or sadism like the wolves do. Because among other things, he doesn't require meat in order to survive, right? A grass creature relies on photosynthesis, so killing creatures isn't really intrinsic to survival. Third reason I believe that the wolves are really interesting, and also that Donny's way different, and that this interaction is pretty interesting, is that Donny's one-off character. He's isolated. He's immature, and also, as mentioned, his grassy features. These all contribute to his lack of competitive edge. He's annoying. His competitive edge is like just to keep other more harsh predators away from him, but they also wouldn't eat him because he's made of grass. The episode is interesting in that it presents very capable predators that are repelled by a weaker species odor. This is a fictional equivalent of like a skunk because they can spray deadlier opponents to cause them to flee where otherwise they would be eaten. This idea is very entertainingly addressed through this show, but the fact remains that the status quo that Donny maintains with Obnoxygen is a state of being often held together seemingly through coincidence. This coincidence, if you can call it, is a complex interplay of nature and predatory aversion that results in discomfort and relative safety of local populations of the house people in the cartoon. What I think this cartoon manages to do is to achieve a great deal of abstract thought in a short amount of time, and therefore I wanted to share this information with you guys. A takeaway in this video, I think, is maybe there's two. So first, I think that the most important takeaway would be to carefully consider the situation and the people that you attempt to change, right? Finn in this episode is sort of At one of the younger points he is throughout the entirety of the show. So partly it has to do with maturity, especially when you have watched the entire show like I have and you look retroactively back and he's younger. It has to do with maturity, I think. But when this was made, they didn't know how long the show would run, that sort of thing. So I don't know if that was an intentionally done thing. This season 1 episode of Adventure Time illustrates that changing an unfamiliar dynamic or like biosphere, food chain, that sort of thing, has hidden consequences. And what I'm thinking here is also in human context. So when you go into a foreign nation and you try and assume that the way they do things is the same that you do it, it's usually not a good thing to do. There's a lot of negative consequences after the conquering nation leaves, that sort of thing. But in other words, be extremely careful not to enforce standards of living on people or groups of people that do not work for them. Hence, don't try to put a square peg in a round hole, that sort of thing. Don't try and force democracy on nations that don't necessarily conform to that. The Y Wolf's silly appearance and mannerisms, in my analysis, represents a far more sinister pattern of systematic behavior like murder, as opposed to Donny's laid-back bullying. A good example of this might be human territorial struggles. Imagine two similar regions fighting for territory, like say Rome and Parthia in the distant past, and one instigates a conflict for greed and is repelled and eventually kept at bay by values that they hate. Enforced by another civilized culture, if you might want to call it that. And in this example, the antagonist also has the ambitions not solely for greed but also for more power. This tendency reflects the ambitions of empires to seek to extend without end. This imperial evil is what Donny stands in opposition to, and the deeper, more sinister Y-Wolves embody in Adventure Time. This episode teaches that one should be extremely careful to remove annoyances, as some annoyances are necessary to survival. As we see with the house people, certain circumstances are altered, entire scenarios can change. Understanding cause and effect, especially in environments that you're not familiar with, is imperative to navigating life and dealing with communities that seem different than our own. Well, that's the main portion of the video. I do hope that you appreciated the clip and maybe even that episode. If you have the chance, watching the entire episode would be interesting. Also, watching all of Adventure Time would be interesting. Both are very good. Now I'm going to segue into the bonus section of the video. And one of the original ideas that I had was about specific geopolitical issues that relate to when the episode aired. Some generally had to do with Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi. Violent takeovers in the Middle East is what I was thinking of. But much earlier, you have examples of Hitler replacing the Weimar Republic. So anything where a weaker society was replaced by a more autocratic, stronger state that did a lot worse things. And a good example of this as well would be the Belgian conquerors leaving Rwanda in the 90s. And when Rwanda found itself without these European overlords, you might say, or conquerors, there was national genocide and war and unrest. And then also for the Eastern European states during the Cold War, there was Germany, who occupied a lot of Eastern European states, and then only to be replaced by the Soviet era Eastern Europe, which arguably is worse. Another one, I don't think anyone would have been familiar with this in the writers group, but I don't know. I have no clue. Political unrest in Alexander the Great's collapsing kingdom after he defeated Persia. He later died without any clear lines of succession being set up. This is also a similar corollary. And I think it's just completely random that this happens to be the case. I think it's interesting, but I don't think this was intentional. And then also one that I thought of that's after the show writers would have been aware of is ISIS taking over, particularly replacing a strong ideal with a stronger ideal, or a more right wing or a more left ideal. Many political movements you could say this about, but I chose ISIS. So anyway, those are the main things that I wanted to talk about in the bonus. And also, if you guys have other ideas about the Donny Y-Wolf situation, or about power vacuums in general, or about theories in Adventure Time, imperial power systems, or something like that, please post in the comments below. I'd be interested to read them and respond to them, and I appreciate you watching this video and being engaged with the content I make generally. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.